Governments love to tell you they're working for your financial freedom. They talk about stability, growth, and opportunity. But if you look closely at history, a much darker pattern appears. For centuries, governments have used hidden financial tricks to keep ordinary people struggling, while quietly consolidating wealth and power for themselves. And the most shocking part, these tricks aren't new. They've been recycled for hundreds of years, wrapped in different language, sold under new names, but always with the same purpose: to move wealth upward and keep the majority dependent. Let's start with the oldest and simplest trick of all: inflation. When a government spends more than it can collect through taxes, it faces two choices. It can admit the truth and raise taxes openly, a politically dangerous move. Or it can take the quiet route. It can debase the currency, reduce the value of every coin and every note in circulation. Ancient Rome mastered this tactic. By the 3rd century after Christ, Roman emperors were drowning in military expenses. Instead of raising taxes openly, they began quietly reducing the silver content of the denarius. What was once nearly pure silver slowly turned into mostly copper, with only a thin wash of silver on the surface. The empire acted as if nothing had changed, but everyone holding those coins paid the price. Inflation exploded, savings disappeared, wages fell behind almost overnight. It was a silent tax on the population, one that required no announcement and no consent. And this trick never disappeared. It's still used today, just with central banks replacing imperial mints. The Middle Ages introduced another version of the same game: forced loans. Monarchs in England, France, and Spain routinely pressured wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the crown. These loans weren't voluntary. Refusal meant fines, confiscation, or worse. Sometimes repayment was promised with interest, but when it came, it was often late, paid back in devalued currency, or never paid at all. The government continued funding wars and building palaces, while merchants had little choice but to surrender their capital. The trick was simple: coercion, disguised as patriotism and duty. And it worked. For centuries. By the 17th century, the trick had evolved. Now, the financial system itself became the weapon. When Britain created the Bank of England in 1694, it wasn't an act of charity. The government needed money to fund wars against France. Wealthy investors stepped in, buying government bonds. In return, the crown guaranteed steady interest payments, funded by taxes. On the surface, it looked like a fair deal. But look closer. Who actually paid those taxes? Ordinary people, through duties on everyday goods like salt, beer, and cloth. The wealthy lent money to the state and earned secure, risk-free interest. The poor paid higher taxes to cover those payments. It was a system designed to transfer wealth upward, disguised as national finance. And it locked in a pattern that still exists today. The safest investments in the world are loans to governments, and those returns are ultimately guaranteed by the labor and consumption of the masses. Fast forward to the modern era, and the tricks are everywhere. Take deficit spending. Governments rack up massive debts, issuing bonds bought by investors, banks, and foreign powers. Politicians tell the public it's for infrastructure, jobs, or social programs. But much of that money flows elsewhere. To defense contractors, corporate subsidies, and bailouts. When it's time to pay the bill, governments don't cut spending at the top. They raise taxes, they inflate the currency, or they slash social benefits. The illusion is that the debt is for the people. The reality is that the burden falls on their shoulders, while the profits flow to bondholders. And then there are bailouts. During the 2008 financial meltdown, banks made reckless bets, bundled toxic mortgages into securities, and nearly collapsed the global economy. So who paid the price? Ordinary taxpayers, through massive government bailouts. And who profited afterward? The very same banks, emerging bigger, stronger, and more concentrated than before. The trick was simple: privatize the gains, socialize the losses. The public was told this was necessary to save the system. Even the way governments handle pensions and retirement is a sleight of hand. For decades, people in the United States, Britain, and across Europe paid into government-managed systems, trusting the money would be there when they retired. But in reality, governments rarely save that money. They spend it immediately, and leave IOUs in its place. The promise is that future taxpayers will cover the cost when the bill comes due. In essence, it's a generational Ponzi scheme wrapped in official language. It works, until demographics shift, populations age, and the system becomes unsustainable. Then come the reforms. Benefits are reduced, retirement ages are raised, or payouts are quietly inflated away. Notice the pattern. At every stage, the trick depends on perception. Inflation is called growth. Forced loans become duty. National debt is framed as investment. Bailouts are labeled stability. Pension cuts are sold as reform. The language hides the reality. A steady transfer of wealth. From the many to the few. From the bottom to the top. And history shows why this works. Most people don't study economic history. They don't understand financial systems. And they don't see the trap until it's too late. In recent decades, the tricks have only grown more sophisticated. Take quantitative easing. A term few people had even heard before the 2008 crisis. Central banks created trillions of dollars out of thin air, buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to stabilize markets. Politicians and bankers assured the public it was necessary to prevent collapse. And for the financial system, it worked. Asset prices soared. Stocks, real estate, and bonds surged in value. But who owns most of those assets? The wealthy. For the average household without major investments, the benefits were minimal. The downside, however, was very real: distorted markets and rising living costs. The trick was simple. Money creation saved the system for those at the top, while fueling inflation and inequality for everyone else. Another modern sleight of hand is stealth taxation. Instead of raising income taxes directly, governments quietly tax through other means. Sales taxes, fuel duties, and most of all, inflation. When prices rise faster than wages, the difference becomes a hidden tax. On savings and purchasing power. Governments love inflation because it reduces the real value of their debts. But for citizens, it erodes financial freedom. You might feel richer because your salary is higher in nominal terms. But if your costs rise faster than your income, you're actually losing wealth. This isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. Inflation isn't just an accident of economics. It's one of the most consistent tools governments use to shift the cost of their spending onto you, without ever admitting it. Then there's regulatory capture. On the surface, regulations exist to protect the public. Financial rules, safety standards, consumer protections. But history tells a different story. Powerful industries often influence the very regulators meant to oversee them. Railroads in the 19th century. Oil companies in the 20th. Tech and finance today. It's the same lesson learned on a smaller scale by the Peaky Blinders on the streets of Birmingham. Better to own the referee than to fight the game. Governments use regulation to appear protective. Behind the curtain, the largest corporations carve out loopholes, limiting competition and keeping profits flowing. The public sees protection. The insiders see profit. During World War I and World War II, governments issued enormous amounts of bonds, urging citizens to buy them as a patriotic duty. People believed they were supporting their country, and they were. But those bonds also became lucrative, risk-free investments for the wealthy, guaranteed by future taxes. In the 21st century, the pattern hasn't changed. Trillions spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were financed through debt. That debt benefited defense contractors, banks, and bondholders, while ordinary taxpayers carried the burden. The trick is presentation. Wars are always framed as temporary emergencies. But the financial consequences last for generations. Long after the soldiers come home. Governments also weaponize complexity itself. Tax codes that run thousands of pages. Financial instruments so complicated even experts struggle to explain them. Budgets filled with jargon and hidden line items. The result is an environment where ordinary citizens cannot track where money is actually going. Complexity becomes camouflage. If you can't see the transfer of wealth, you can't resist it. In ancient Rome, debased coins were a visible sign of the trick. Today, it's balance sheets buried under acronyms and obscure programs. Different form, same strategy. Make the system too complex to follow. And the transfer can happen unnoticed. Why does this matter now? Because these tricks aren't fading. They're accelerating. Inflation eats away at savings. Debt loads grow larger every year. And bailouts remain the reflex. Whenever markets begin to wobble, central banks continue to manipulate the money supply. Governments pass costs onto the public in ways so indirect that most people never connect the dots. The result? A system designed to keep you working harder for less real wealth, while the financial elite grows stronger. The lesson from history isn't just that these tricks exist. It's that they always return. When Rome debased its coins, citizens suffered. When monarchs forced loans, merchants lost fortunes. When modern states inflate and borrow, households bear the burden. Different ages. Same mechanism. And here's the harsh truth. Most people will never escape these tricks. Because they don't even realize they're being played. They take inflation as natural. Taxes as inevitable. Bailouts as acts of mercy. They believe government messaging instead of studying economic history. And that ignorance? It's the most powerful trick of all. When people forget the past, they cannot recognize its repetition. That's why governments and elites prefer a public uneducated in finance. Financial education is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. If you know the tricks, you're harder to manipulate. So, what should you take away? First, always look beyond the headline. When governments announce stimulus, ask who profits first. When inflation rises, remember it's not just bad luck, it's policy. When regulations appear, ask who wrote them and who benefits. Second, build real wealth outside the traps. Assets that can hold value even when currency does not. Third, never assume the system works for you just because it says it does. Systems exist to protect themselves, not you. History doesn't repeat. But if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. The financial tricks that kept Roman citizens broke are the same ones draining your bank account today. Only dressed in modern language. The only difference is whether you recognize them in time. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers.